Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of November of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course, I believe that you are waiting for the first results of the president elections in the United States of America. And most likely by the time you start watching this video, you will receive the first numbers. And you will understand, and we will understand during the next 12 hours who is going to win and what is going to happen with Ukraine in the near future. If Kamala Harris wins, most likely the special military operation would be endless or at least will be prolonged for another 4 years. And if Donald Trump wins, most likely he will try to stop the war as soon as possible. So let's wait, but regarding the situation in the United States of America, regarding the results of the president elections, the Russians continue their offensive operation because the Russians have their task, and despite and regarding the results, they need to complete them. And first, let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the armed force of Russian Federation managed to get a little bit closer in the direction of Velika Novoselovka, trying to complete semi-encirclement of the settlement by the end of the November, because if they are able to do this, then the Russian forces from Pryutina will begin their own offensive in the direction of T-05-10 road with the purpose to encircle the village completely. As for now, just a small gains in Russian favor to the east of Velika Novoselovka. Very interesting details are coming to the south of the river by the name of Sukhi Yali. Today the Russian sources published the video of how they were attacking the Ukrainian positions. In this video we can see Russian fighting infantry vehicle with infantry stormtroopers on board, and the Russians were attacking Ukrainian stronghold. As a result of this attack, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to defeat the Ukrainians in this line and to capture additional positions. And this moment of landing Russian infantry was geolocated. This is exactly the point where the Russians landed and where the Russians began attacking the Ukrainian forces. If we return back once again in map, the Russians were moving something like this. After the infantry landed, Russian personnel carrier returned back in the direction of the village by the name of Bagayavlenka. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, these parts in Russian favor. As you can see, the progress is significant. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to information published by neutral mappers, the Russians also managed to advance between the villages of Bagayavlenka and Trudova and to take under control additional 2 lines in the fortifications. And the most important probably is coming, the most important information is coming from the territory between Bagayavlenka, Vadzyan and Elizavetovka. As you can see, according to a reports that were published by different mappers, the Russians managed to take under control this dense network of the fortifications, which is very important because now the Ukrainians have no strongholds, no defense between this line and the village of Sukhi Yali. So now let's summarize everything and let's try to follow and try to see how exactly the situation was developing during the previous several days. So this is the situation on the 2nd of November. Now let's start from the 1st of November. This is on the 1st of November. This is the situation on the 2nd of November. This is the situation on the 3rd of November. The Russians managed to take under control the village of Maximovka. This is the situation by the end of the 4th, so no changes on the ground. And this is the situation by the end of the 5th of November. The Russians managed to get as close as possible to the village of Konstantinopolska. And most likely during the next few days, the Russians will try to take under control everything that lays inside of this red line. This will allow the Russians to maintain the line of combat contact, to shorten the lines, and to create a stable foothold, broad front line in front of the river of Sukhi Yali. And then the Russians will be able to decide where to attack next, and the Ukrainians will be forced to keep the significant number of forces in this line if they want to prevent the bad consequences of Russian attack. Now let's talk about the Elizavetovka agglomeration. There are very heavy clashes, and today there were a lot of posts published by the 79th Air Mobile Brigade, and they stated that the situation for the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction is very critical. And this is not like very critical, they used the word like disaster, because the 79th Brigade, the units, reported that the Russians launched a full-scale offensive operation that they have never seen before. The Russians been using the significant number of forces and units and tanks. For the previous several hours, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belts in multiple places and to force the Ukrainians to retreat. Furthermore, the official Telegram channel of the 79th Brigade reported Ukrainians were forced to abandon the significant number of tanks and vehicles that were completely normal without any damage. So they were forced to do this because the Russians were encircling them. So most likely during the upcoming night from the 5th on the 6th of November, we will adjust the map, we will start receiving first geolocations, and something tells me that tomorrow we're going to see completely different picture in this area, or at least we're going to see something like this. Everything inside of this red line would be captured by the Russians. At least this information was confirmed and provided us by the 79th Brigade, which is responsible for the defense of these lines. Now let's talk about the Kurakhove direction. The Russians during the previous 24 hours were bombing and attacking the settlement itself. As for the changes on the ground, today the Russian sources published a video that confirms complete control over the village by the name of Vovchenka, at least over its western part. The village was captured by the 114th Motor Rifle Separate Brigade of the Armed Forces of Russian Federation. We can see lots of episodes of the final days of clashes on the territory of the settlement, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, and in the latest part of the video we can see several Russian soldiers that were raising the flag in the most western part of the settlement. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Furthermore, as for the pro-Ukrainian mappers and as for neutral mappers, they stated that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to take under control not just the village of Vovchenka, but the Russians also took under control the village of Stepanovka. So the situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse, and this is another small knife attack from the northeastern part of Kurakhove. So you see that the Russians are using the tactics of 1,000 knives. They attack, but they're not trying to break through the defense. They're not trying to answer and to pass, let's say, another 20 or 10 kilometers. They're doing small attacks, and every single attack bring them another small gains, and they're doing this every single day, and every single day from every single part of the front line they're getting another and another piece of pie. This is very useful tactics, this is very successful tactics, as we can see, and we see that Ukrainians still haven't managed to find the solution how to slow down the Russian tactics and how to repel all these small attacks. Now let's move further and let's talk about the territory to the west of Selidovo-Tsukur in a line. The Russian forces continue advancing with the purpose to encircle the Ukrainian positions along this dense network of the fortifications. This very powerful defense belt, and this defense belt most likely under complete Ukrainian control, and the Russians decided not to attack this direction in front. They decided to outflank these positions from the north and to outflank these positions from the south. At least geolocation are saying about this. For example, in this video that today was published by the pro-Ukrainian sources, we can see Ukrainian tank in the central part of Novodmitrivka, and the Ukrainian tank within a very close distance was attacking the edge Russian positions and Russian stormtroopers. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. If we compare the situation between the 4th and the 5th of November, you're going to see that just yesterday the Russians managed to let's say achieve the significant breakthrough to the southwest of Selidovo and to Novoalexeyevka, and I'll remind you that some pro-Russian sources have already stated that the village of Novoalexeyevka was completely captured. And today on the 5th of November we see another small knife attack of the Russian forces to the west of Novodmitrivka. I believe that tomorrow the Russians will make another attack on Novoalexeyevka, and the day after tomorrow another attack in the direction of Zarya, which will make the Ukrainians to run from one side to another, which will make them exhausted, which will force them to reveal their own positions, and of course which will lead to significant losses. Obviously, during the next several days the Russians will take under control the village of Zarya, which will create with additional Russian progress in the villages of Novoalexeyevka and Yurivka something like a small cauldron or semicircle for those Ukrainians that are currently located in this dense network of the fortifications. Furthermore, meanwhile, the Russians continue moving along the railways. During the previous 24 hours, we got another batch of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian forces. And there is a very important difference between the videos that we were receiving during the previous days and the videos that we start receiving from today. The thing is, and the difference is that as for the 5th of November, more and more videos, we can see that Ukrainians are running away from the area of Russian offensive. When talking about the previous period of time, you were receiving a lot of videos of how the Ukrainians were trying to bring forces, bring vehicles, tanks, personnel carriers as close as possible to the line of combat contact in the village of Pyshtinka, Petrovka, Grigorovka. But as for now, we are receiving a lot of videos of how the Ukrainians are trying to run away from this area to save as many as possible vehicles and to save as many as possible soldiers and personnel. So this is the situation, and we have, as you can see, also changes on the ground. In this video we can see another episode of Russian offensive operation. In this video we can see the significant number of Russian vehicles and tanks that were attacking the Ukrainian positions. We can see how the Russian infantry was landing and taking under the control more and more strongholds in this direction, and you see that the Russians were walking as a carousel. One vehicle arrived, landed infantry, returned back to the base. Another vehicle arrived, landed infantry, and then vehicle returned back. And the Russians made a significant number of these turns until they managed to concentrate a critical mass in this part and to secure the entire territory. So the Russian vehicles were moving from this part of Grigorovka in the direction of these Ukrainian positions that were located in this part of the railways. When the landing operation ended successfully, Russian vehicles returned back in the direction of Vishneva. So the Russians are moving, and basically the Russians just began moving, because during the previous days the Russians were just bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the railways without any changes on the ground. And as for the 5th of November, we start receiving first updates of additional Russian progress, which is very important. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction, because during the previous 24 hours we got another video that confirmed Russian progress. During the previous several days, the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russian forces, trying to cut this salient, this pocket on the Ukrainian side of Seversky Donetsk Donbass River. For these purposes, the Ukrainians conducted counter-offensive operation with the use of significant number of tanks and vehicles. The Ukrainians were attacking something like this, trying to cut this territory in two, but the Ukrainian tank was discovered and destroyed, and Ukrainian forces were forced to retreat. After that, the Russians conducted another wave of offensive operation and managed to improve their positions to the south of the original foothold. So these are the changes on the ground during the previous 24 hours. This is the map by the end of the 4th of November. This is the map by the end of the 5th of November. The Russians continue attacking, advancing, and most likely during the next few days they will try to improve their positions this way, even and to take under control the village of Stupochki. If the Russians can take under control the village of Stupochki, by this they will be able to secure their western flank, and then they will be able to move in the direction of the central part of Chasiv Yar. So without securing their flanks, the Russians have no chances to advance. First they need to secure the flanks. Now let's talk about the Seversk direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take the village of Ivanodarivka. This is very important progress, but we still have some doubts about the status of this stronghold to the west-north of the village of Ivanodarivka, because without control over this stronghold, the Russians have no chances to hold their positions in Ivanodarivka, and sooner or later they would be forced to fall back in the direction of the railways. They need to take under control the stronghold to have a stable positions for a very long period of time and to continue offensive operation in the northern and the northwestern direction. So most likely there are very heavy clashes right now for this stronghold, but for now we haven't received anything that can confirm Russian advance in this direction. Now let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. The dynamic in this direction is not so fast, but not so slow as well. Almost every single 2 or 3 days we got another update from different mappers or from another video that allow us to adjust the map in Russian favor. Obviously the days of this foothold are counted, and most likely by the end of November both the village of Terny and the village of Yampolovka would be captured by the Russians, but because the Russians now can attack this territory from two directions, from the north and from the south, and the Russians have already established complete control over the Ukrainian positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zherebets. As for the north in Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just regular Russian activities with FPV drones. Pro-Ukrainian mappers confirmed Russian control over significant territories between the village of Kolesnikovka and Zagryzovo, but once again without significant changes. There was just one video that was published by pro-Russian sources of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the fields between the village of Novoselivska and Pershatravneva. Based on this video we made small changes on the ground, just this part of true lines were captured by the Russians. As for the Kharkiv direction, nothing special. We have just one video that was published by the Russians. In this video we can see several number of attacks with FPV drones on Ukrainian positions along this water reservoir. Based on this video we have adjusted the northern Liptsi in Ukrainian favor, as well as some positions along the water reservoir. As for Sudy direction, we see that the Russians are finishing regrouping before the third wave of attack. Most likely the Russians are waiting for the end, for the results of the elections of the President of the United States of America, because everything depends on it. If Kamala Harris is going to become the next president, then most likely during the next week the United States of America will lift any restrictions for Ukraine to attack deep inside of Russia. Western countries will provide additional military packages and so on, so the Russians will not wait for this and they will begin offensive. But if Trump wins, most likely the negotiation process can be started somewhere in the second part of December. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.